Good evening, everyone. I'm Christine Robinson, Mayor of West Grey. Welcome to tonight's community information session to discuss the draft community improvement plan. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in tonight, and I would also like to acknowledge all of our members of council, for that matter, who are joining us this evening. Deputy Mayor Tom Hutchinson, Councillors Doug Hutchinson, Stephen Townsend, Rebecca Hergert, Jeffrey Shea, and Beth Hamilton. Tonight we are here to listen. We're here to listen to the staff presentation and the community dialogue. There will be no decisions made this evening because this is not a council meeting. Also joining us tonight is our Chief Administrative Officer, Laura Johnston, West Grey's Manager of Planning and Development, Laura Lee Spencer, and our Recreation Supervisor, Cody Hewlett, who is helping with the technical needs of this meeting. I would also like to welcome Steve Furness, Grey County's Manager of Economic Development. Steve Furness, thank you very much for joining us tonight and assisting with any questions from the audience. With that, I will be turning the meeting over to Laura Lee Spencer, our Manager of Planning and Development, who will walk us through her presentation and overview of the draft community improvement plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Robinson, and welcome to tonight's information session. We'll be focusing on the elements of the draft community improvement plan, highlighting some examples of eligible projects and outlining the next steps. Supervisor Hewlett will share the screen and will handle the audio portion of the question and answer at the end of the presentation. So the community improvement plan is intended to create policies to provide incentives for growth and development. West Grey intends to realize its economic development vision of being investment ready and open for business. The municipality has identified a need to enable and promote prioritized development across the municipality and to support and complement the County of Grey official plan policies. The key components of this plan are to better utilize underdeveloped properties and promote private investment in land and buildings within the municipality with the support of the municipality. The community improvement plan works for residents as it applies to each commercial property throughout the entire municipality. The plan enables the municipality to issue grants toward commercial redevelopment projects. Property owners are required to fund 50% of the project on their own behalf. Financial incentives are available to property owners, businesses, and tenants with authorization. There is a funding commitment of $100,000 by the municipality at this time, with $20,000 being provided by the county over the course of the next 5 years. It is imperative that anyone interested in the program consult with the municipality before the project commences. Funds are only granted to those projects that have not commenced and are available only before the work begins. The program itself has several streams in eligibility. So there's 7 streams within the program to allow for things such as facade, building, signage improvement, property, landscaping, and parking, accessibility improvement, planning and building permit fee grant, secondary suite development grants, surplus land and building grant, and finally, the last tenet is the environmental study grant. So to give you just an example of what each of these streams enter into. So property, landscaping, and parking. So the examples of eligible costs include the following, or a combination more thereof. So professional landscaping, sodding, tree planting, etc. The repair or replacement of driveways and parking areas. The installation or improvement for permanent patio or sidewalk cafes. The installation of benches or permanent planters. And the costs associated with hiring a professional landscape architect or designers to achieve those components. The facade, building, and signage improvement grant includes the following, and again, in any combination. The repair, replacement, or installation of awnings and canopies. The repair, replacement, or restoration of masonry, brickwork, detailing, or structural improvements. Again, repair, replace, or install new signage, including light signs. Paint, clean, or resurface building frontages. Paint or install murals or wall out on one side or rear of facilities. The costs associated with any professional architectural services are also covered as part of this grant. For the property landscaping and parking grant, here's a couple of, accessibility improvement grant. You can see this is just an example of what the two facades shown in the building, the improvement thereof that a grant would be eligible for. In terms of accessibility, there's installation of automatic doors, wheelchair ramps, to widen an entryway, to level or repair pathways, the installation of an elevator, and interior improvements in conjunction with exterior improvements. So the planning and building permit fee grant is for the redevelopment of property for commercial, industrial, office, or mixed use, major additions, and a minimum of 25% increase to existing floor areas, to convert upper story space to a mixed use or commercial building to residential units, and professional fees that may be required in terms of engineers, architects, or planners. The secondary suite development grant would permit the development of a portion of an existing residential, commercial, or agricultural property, development or redevelopment of an outbuilding, and in general, any community improvement plan eligible products which require a building permit or planning approvals may be eligible for this grant. And finally, surplus land and building grants. The eligible costs relate to affordable housing projects, surplus lands and buildings offered through a public process, and land and buildings to be awarded at a reduced cost, including the potential for no cost. The environmental study grant includes all of the following and possibly in combination. If a phase 1 environmental site assessment was required, a phase 2 environmental site assessment, I see there's an error there, I apologize for that, and remedial work plan and/or risk assessment plan that may be required as part of any planning application put forward by a property owner. Again, I can't stress this enough. Consultation needs to be provided with the municipality prior to the actual commencement of work. So timing of community improvement works is a vital component that needs to be explained. It's only property owners or tenants with consent that are eligible. The financial incentives are not available to greenhouse properties. You may not have any outstanding property tax arrears. The number of applicants per property, the applications per property per se, financial incentive application and supporting materials. That application will be posted on our website once it's been approved. The project must be in accordance with municipal bylaws. It must be in accordance with planning approvals and building permits. There must be a conformity with the design criteria outlined in the plan. The completed works are to be consistent with the approved application without modification. Combination and value of the incentives, non-maintenance or life cycle replacements, grants to be a maximum of 50% of the eligible costs, and the maximum grant amount is $500. Or sorry, the minimum grant amount is $500. So the requirement for application, as I stated before, once the application form has been approved, it will be available on our website. There must be an acknowledgement that the municipality is not responsible for costs that are related to the application. All applications, again, must be received prior to the commencement of works, and the applicant must declare any other source of funding that they're eligible for at the time. Review will be conducted by the Community Improvement Plan Staff Administrator, and approval and denial will be based on the administration recommendation to council. The execution of the final incentive program agreement and additional information may be required depending on the scope of the works that are proposed. So we're looking in terms of process with the implementation of this plan. We're going to review the comments from the public, the deadline being the end of August of this year. There'll be review and revision to go back to council at some point, October 2020, and there'll be approval and implementation in that same month. That is the intended timeline at this point in time, depending on the scope of the comments that we receive from the public. So that's the conclusion of the presentation in terms of the scope of the work. I know our very nice manager of economic development for the County of Grey is online with us as well. So at some point, if there's public comments here, Steve, I will let you put your hand up and just kind of pitch in when you feel necessary. Mr. Furness also provided a very detailed document that gives some of the relief programs that people are eligible for in the county. And I wonder if, Cody, if you don't mind, if you could put that up. Perhaps Steve wants to just go through those programs, if that's okay with you, Steve.
Yeah, that would be fine. Thank you. I guess one of the things we just wanted to talk about is the facade. The community improvement plan has been around, the program's been around for a while, and it is in the context of a pandemic and the financial stresses that businesses are going under. You know, there's a lot of other programs that are available right now for businesses, and the sheets we have here are the ones that you would be familiar with. Although I would encourage business owners to keep looking. We just had announced through RTO 7, there are 2 new programs. They're not large, but they are significant for the tourism businesses, and they're still available today. One is a marketing video, and another is $1,000 to cover COVID costs. So this, I don't know what I need to go through unless someone wants me to, each one of these programs. So these are the programs the federal and provincial government, mostly the federal government, has been offering support. So in the context, the community improvement plan is there as an ongoing long-term partnership as businesses or tenants, business owners look to improve their buildings and their businesses. So we didn't want people to get confused with the CIP being launched in the middle of a pandemic. We had started work on this before that. Unless anyone has specific questions, and I think you could page down and you would, if there's anyone else online, you would see there's others. So these are the programs you'd mostly be familiar with the loans and support for wage subsidies and CERB for individuals. Does anyone have any questions or?
So if I may step in, members of the public who wish to have a question or comment during this period may, if you have joined us online, by raising your hand, which would be in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Alternatively, if you have joined us by phone, you can press *9 on your phone and that would raise your hand. Upon raising your hand, I will then call upon any member of the public to state their name and their question. Alternatively, you can also send a chat message to myself, Cody Hewlett, Recreation Supervisor, if you would like me to read a question on your behalf. We would now invite any member of the public who has a question to raise their hand or send a chat message to myself. I see that Councillor Shea has a question. I will unmute him to ask his question.
Sorry, it took me a second to unmute. Thanks for the presentation, Mr. Hewlett. I'm very pleased with the initiative that the municipality has taken in developing this program. Are you entertaining questions at this point on any subjects or just on the county portion?
And so, yes, thank you, Councillor Shea, and through you, Madam Mayor. We would answer any questions related to the community improvement plan at this point in time, county or local. Okay,
great. Well, thank you. So 2 quick questions, and you know, this is great information, and I just wanted a little bit of clarification for anybody who's listening in. You said that the approval process was that applicants would be approved by the appropriate authority. Could we clarify who that authority would be?
Absolutely. And through you, Madam Mayor, Councillor Shea, that it would be through my own office of the manager of planning and development.
Okay, so you would be approving those. That's
Yes.
great. And you mentioned a minimum of $500, but I'm sorry, I missed maximum.
Well, this program, and again, through you, Madam Mayor, Councillor Shea, this program will be operated on a first come, first served basis. So when the funds are allocated per year, the scope of projects is obviously going to be different for every business owner and what they intend to do. When the funds are tapped out for that year, then the application would be put in process for commencing next year.
Okay, terrific, Ms. Spencer. Thank you very much.
I have received a chat message from West Grey Chamber. I believe this is for you, Planner Spencer. For the facades, can it involve the sidewalk in front of a commercial building, such as a sidewalk cafe?
And through you, Madam Mayor, just to clarify, are we speaking to something that relates to public sidewalks, or is this a sidewalk in front of a business on their own property? They're two very different things. Certainly there's allocation and consideration for those permanent sidewalks to exist. Again, those things would have to go and be vetted through a process through our Director of Public Works and Infrastructure to ensure that we're not creating a safety issue in terms of the creation of that patio and the movement of people going down that road. But it certainly is a consideration. If it's the improvement of sidewalks on their own property, that's certainly eligible under the accessibility component if there's a problem with stability of that sidewalk in front of their building.
And I just received clarification. It's for sidewalks located on the main streets.
That would have to be something that be vetted. A plan would have to be in place, and it would be vetted through the Director of Infrastructure and Public Works. Again, just to ensure that we're not reusing sidewalks where we have people now diverting around, an outside patio. It's eligible for the infrastructure that would need to be in place in order for that to see fruition, but it is not. It's not contemplated as something that we can't take the safety considerations out of. Let's put it that way.
And again, I would just like to state, any member of the public who would like to raise a question or comment at this time, you can do so by raising your hand. If you have joined us on the computer, you can click on the raise your hand icon, usually located in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. If you have joined us via phone, you can press *9, or alternatively, you can send a chat message to myself, Cody Hewlett, Recreation Supervisor, and I will read the question on your behalf. I see that Laura Johnson, our CAO, has her hand raised. Laura, your mic is unmuted, so you can go whenever you are ready.
Great, and thank you very much, Cody. And I wonder if we could just talk to Steve a little bit about how other communities have leveraged their community improvement plans, because this is a very important tool that is actually an investment in our economic development initiatives. And I know a number of Grey County municipalities have either implemented or are beginning to the same process that West Grey is. And Steve, if you could just give us a sense of some of the success stories and what that could look like for West Grey.
Okay, thank you. So the number of communities that have CIPs, so we have Sill and Sounds had a CIP for many years, and I believe Hanover. Meaford, their CIP is a couple years old. Grey Highlands just approved theirs. And of course, West Grey's starting their process, or more than started, and Blue Mountains has just started, and the rest don't have them. I think from my experience, originally community improvement plans, there was no legal way through the Municipal Act to offer incentives. And yet, when you talk about facades and other improvements, an improvement to one building improves the whole neighborhood. So there is a public good to the investment, but it does have to be based on a criteria, and it is public money. So, you know, Owen Sound, the experience I've seen in Owen Sound is many facades of small businesses were re-enhanced, and primarily the funding just allowed the business owner or the tenant to go that much further with their improvements. And in terms of consultation on historic facades, we saw some really nice buildings. I think probably the one that, if people have been in Owen Sound recently or lately, would have been the Milkmaid. And they consistently get 3 or 4 applications every year, and they've been doing that for many years. Hanover, I think, had a bit of a blitz, but we've seen improvements to numerous buildings, and some with double frontages. If a business is on 2 streets and their sign has to go across, you know, 2 frontages, it helps with that. But there are other community improvement plans that have a range of other activities or programs. For example, Meaford was probably one of the first municipalities to designate the entire municipality, which I think is a really smart move, and that's what you've proposed. And they included agricultural, agri-food businesses. So somebody at the farm gate, not necessarily a small food producer or artisan, they wanted to include them as well. I think some of the other areas where brownfield was another area where it was very important to help business owners understand environmental cleanup. Environmental cleanup has a cost to it, and it's really impacts decisions. And unless you can afford to do the study, you can't really make decisions going forward. So I would say that's the 2 areas: facade programs and brownfield cleanup are where I've seen the most success. Although a number of businesses, particularly those that, depending on the makeup of the street, accessibility improvements are also now very important, with ramps going into street level and making sure customers can access buildings. I have seen a lot of other programs, and this is where Blue Mountains will probably focus a lot of their energy, is on conversion of suites and affordable housing. Probably the fastest way to build new units is to take a secondary level unit that's been vacant or was used for warehousing or some other use and have it converted. And it'll be interesting to see if the investment amounts that you've identified, and as well as Blue Mountain, when they get their CIP in place, actually do what they'd like it to do. And I guess that's the other thing, is if you see something that's not working, you have the ability to change it. And the nice thing is the new rules around the community improvement plan allow you to make those changes. You no longer have to go to the province to get approval. So it really is, you can customize some of these programs depending on what you need. I'd also suggest that you have the ability, if you have a large opportunity, investment opportunity, you could also consider some other programs like a TIF, which is a tax increment financing, which you haven't identified here, but could consider in the future. And it helps with particular properties that, for whatever reason, are sitting vacant, but are in a particularly public part of the community. You don't actually access those programs very often, but when you do, it helps push some projects over the line. And I guess the biggest example would be the family health team unit in Owen Sound that was built right on the water. But you know, as you get implementing this and you field questions from your business community and your landlords, you'll get a sense of what the need is. I suspect that the facade improvement program, brownfield, and your secondary suite will be the most, you know, the priority. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much for that, Steve. And I would like, oh, Laura Lee has her hand up. So Cody, could we go there, and then I'll ask a further question to that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Steve. That's very informative for, a municipality that's just embarking on this for the first time. Is there any other municipality that you're aware of that has a cap on the number of applications, or as we're proposing, is it just a first come, first served basis?
Most use a first come, first served basis. And generally, when you're talking about facades and buildings, those aren't done overnight. And so the building owners often will come in and talk and understand what's required, and their timelines are generally, over probably potentially over 2 years, so that you can schedule it. But often they will just stack them. So first come, first serve. I know Hanover did a blitz where they had a degree of funding and then it ended. I would suggest, I think the preference is if you can maintain it and over a longer period of time, you'll see greater access to it. And there's nothing stopping you, if you were seeing a great need at a budget cycle, to add more dollars to it. But and there are some communities that will fund maybe 3 of the programs 1 year and then make some of the other programs not eligible for the next 2 years or something like that. So they try to match their budget to the need.
That makes sense. I appreciate that clarification. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Steve. And Laura Lee, if you could just explain a little bit more, and I believe you had a slide about next steps, but could you walk us through the process to where we got to today? Because I know that the province has already reviewed this, and I think that's important for folks to know, this is a process, and, we're in the home stretch.
Absolutely. So the province, they do not approve your community improvement plan. They do provide comment. I think, Steve, as well, we spoke about this before, that they're really trying to make sure that the legalities of your plan are in place. So what happened was we took a very strong document that the county had put together, and that document outlined the fundamentals of this plan. So this really is on the basis of the great work that the County of Grey has done thus far in this respect. And so the province has provided us with comments, nothing glaringly obvious that they don't feel would be appropriate or considered. And so what we've done, this is really just an information session, and there will be a document that will be on our website until the end of the month where we're looking for public comment. So even if someone can't be available for today, they couldn't hear the presentation, but would like to see a copy of it, I believe that we are going through the Office of the CAO to essentially have that document on the website so that people that didn't get the chance to see the presentation, understand what this community improvement plan is about, will have the opportunity to do that and comment. Decision making, as I said, is not going to happen until sometime in October, after we've gone through a revision and comments from council and concerns, so that we can make sure that everyone has their interests addressed in terms of concern.
Great. Thank you very much for that. And you're correct. We have a communication plan in place post presentation tonight that will give interested parties the opportunity to learn a little bit more, contact staff, and provide your feedback. One of the common questions that I think we have is, tenants don't understand that they're actually able to access this grant program as well. It doesn't have to be the property owner. So Steve, could you speak to that and just give us examples of how that has worked in other communities?
Sure. So, when you have a landlord-tenant relationship, it's basically a legal agreement, and sometimes landlords will do a lot of the upgrades and facades and signage and all that. Not generally signage, and other times they provide the shell and say that's up to the tenant. So tenants, long-term tenants, and obviously they work together often to make an application and get the facade and the building to where they want it to be. But it's not uncommon for a tenant who's in maybe leasing a space for a long time, to apply to have a sign permit or an accessibility or conversion of a suite. Generally, it is the landlord, but tenants are eligible as well.
Great, thank you for that. I don't know if there's any questions about the conversation that we've just been having. Cody, could you let me know if there's anyone in the chat?
Not regarding the most recent conversation, but I did receive a chat message just before going back and forth, and it's from the chamber again. If the building inside needs to be renovated, would that be eligible? And there's a second question. What about buildings that need to be torn down on the main streets? What work is being done about beautification on those?
Okay, great, thank you. So that's two separate questions. Laura Lee, are you able to take the first one about interior enhancements?
Certainly, and I appreciate that comment. If it relates to accessibility, absolutely. If it relates to secondary suites, if we're talking specific, commercial properties, it really isn't something, the interior renovation isn't covered by the grant and our current program streams. That's not to say that we might be reviewing this on a yearly basis and that may become a component of interior renovation. But at this point in time, it is not related to interiors. Outside of the accessibility improvement.
Yes, very good, thank you. And what about the second question about demolition?
So the only component of this that would be eligible if they were to improve a building that was derelict, and I think I can pretty much figure which building this is in particular, but they would be able to have a building permit fee grant, but it would have to be an improvement and not a removal. That the removal of unsafe structures really does fall under an order under the Building Code Act and is not necessarily what this program is geared for.
Very good. Thank you for that clarity. So if I could just back up a little bit, Laura Lee, you did a very good job making it clear to the audience that, before you start a project, come and talk to us. Let us know what you're thinking. Let us help you work through this program. But once a business is approved, or a project is approved, what does a business owner need to do? Like, what are their next steps?
So thank you. Once a project is approved, essentially that landowner or tenant, whoever the case may be, they need to follow the plans that have been submitted. So with all things, when you have a building permit, if you've done substantial construction within the first 12 months, then you will be able to have an extension to your building permit. If you don't commence the work within the first 12 months and you don't meet the inspection of, the staff administrator, you will have those funds and be required to repay those funds. It's meant to be a 50-50 grant to motivate them. And that's why it's not just simply a grant from the municipality. You have to demonstrate that you're going to be doing the works as executed through your plan.
Very good. So and I like the language that, it is a partnership between the entrepreneur, the small business owner, the property owner, and the municipality, because this really is an investment program as much as an improvement program. One of the things that we've worked into the plan is design guidelines. And Steve, would you be able to speak to how important that is in creating that, sort of community feel and the vibe that each village in West Grey is striving to achieve?
Yeah, I think that, this is one of the things I think that's really important. It kind of helps unify a downtown, and it's not to say that it all has to be heritage either. What you is an improvement. You want a good, neat facade, but there is room even in historic downtowns to do modern design. What you don't want is something that's disjointed and doesn't fit. And I know there are some communities, I believe Owen Sound, when they offered this consultation, actually paid for initial consultation with a historic architect who had a historical background. And that was quite beneficial to business owners because it allowed them to get a perspective, you know, an initial perspective anyways on options that they had not even considered. And what happens often when you start ripping down a facade of a building is you find out that there's something beneath it and that it actually is salvageable and maybe be able to be brought back. Other times you rip it down and there's nothing there and it's worse than you thought. So having those early discussions, and even I know if you get the development team involved, sometimes the building inspector can go down and be, you know, there may be some questions about that when you start peeling away the facade. So you really get everyone's opinion in there, and you get a solution that works for everyone. And sometimes, you know, it's just a matter of taking that time to consider it. And that's just, the guidelines really help in that regard.
Good, thank you for that. And I know a number of members of our Economic Development Advisory Committee, they are passionate about the identity of their community. And I believe that that's something that we should keep in mind as we're improving our main streets. Oh, Laura Lee, please go ahead.
Thank you. So again, I'm just gonna reiterate the point made by Steve. It really is important. You know, I've tried to maintain that we need to have people come in for consultation purposes before they start spending money designing a project. They really need to come in for that pre-consultation so that they're not exerting funds and they're not commencing the project before a grant approval has been granted.
Yes, yes, and I mean that's able, as you say, Laura Lee, before people start spending money. One of the other questions that we often get is the owner of a building that may not be local and isn't aware of the CIP. How do we, you know, raise that awareness for them that this program is going to be available? Council has committed, you know, well, I mean, $100,000 is a sizable commitment based on the recommendation of our committee. And, you know, we would encourage tenants is, you know, provide them with the information. And just for anyone that is a landlord listening, you know, we would hope that you know, our communication outreach will reach you. But I feel that the tenants as well, you know, this is something that you could work with your landlord to work together on this. Laura Lee, do you have something to add to that, please?
Absolutely. So I think one of the most effective ways to at least reach landowners, now maybe they have a commercial property downtown, but they don't live at that property. But some of the most effective ways of getting the information out there is sending it with tax notices when they do go out, so that people are made aware. You can't make someone read their own mail, come what may, but usually with a tax bill, people will open it up and pay the bill. Even when they get copies from the bank, having a leaflet in there. And I also think we need to blast it out on social media in terms of Facebook and our website and all of those things that we use to, you know, kind of garner people's attention. Personal mail to the entire municipality could be an option. But again, that's a decision that I think we'd have to consider in terms of the long-term perspective. We would have to have that done ASAP so that people can understand a comment, but I do believe that we can get the message out there through social media. And I do think that that is an effective way to do it. And again, the notice of passage with the tax bill, I also think that by the same token, individuals, this is not a static component. So we may be looking at this again next October and saying, look, now we know what trends we need to address, and just let people know that we're going to be reviewing it and it's not permanent, absolute. If there's something happens economically, you know, it could be a very different story in terms of the maximum amount that we will give to any one person. So that's something that everyone has to bear in mind as well as things change.
Yes, thank you for that, Laura Lee. That's exactly right. This is very much a living document and it is fluid.
Absolutely.
Until we can determine to that, because I know you've seen how these plans evolve and grow based on community needs.
And again, it depends on the landowner and their commitment. Now, I guess I didn't touch on the part of reaching tenants. You know, part of the notice that we could send out should really touch on that point, that if you feel that you're renting a commercial space from, you know, your landlord and you have the funds that you think you want to do to put that together, or maybe the landlord wants to help you a little bit as well. You never know, but that's got to be kind of defined in the notice that we give to everyone.
Very good, thank you. And Steve, anything to add to that?
I think you always have to remember that buildings are always changing hands, and it always amazes me, even though you might have a number of new buildings with new facades, people aren't necessarily aware of it. And I think one very important group that you want to always keep talking about it and work with, obviously, your chambers and DIAs and BIs is real estate agents. Part of sending a message that you're open for business is this program. This sends a very clear message to a new business owner that wants to relocate or open a business that you're willing to work with them. And it's a partnership. And it's a very, even though if they may not access it right away when they buy a building, it sends a very, very good message about the attitude of your community and your municipality.
That's a great point, Steve. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Perhaps I'll go to Cody to see if there's any more questions in the chat.
Yes, thank you, Laura. I have received 2 questions, again, from the West Grey Chamber. So I believe in reference to their previous question about building structures. This was in reference to a floor, wall, or ceiling, especially in old buildings. They had made reference to that these may need to be reinforced. Would this be covered under the CIP?
Thank you, Cody. I appreciate that comment. And to the chamber, at this point in time, the expanse of those buildings has not been included as part of the grant. If it was something related to returning character back to the building, that's something, as I said before, that we'd have to look at down the road. But if there's, like, if it's a maintenance issue, it's not eligible. If it's just regular maintenance in terms of, you know, your ceiling needs to be replaced or your roof needs to be replaced, those things aren't included.
Thank you. And the second question is, how long does an applicant have to start their project, and is there a deadline that they must be finished their project within?
So thank you, Cody. As I said before, once you get your building permit, you have to have substantially commenced construction within a 12-month period under the Building Code Act. If you have not done so, again, you wouldn't be eligible to have your building permit extended. Many of these works will require a building permit. This is not a money handout, so to speak. This is a grant and a partnership. So if you're going to apply, we're expecting that you'll give us a date where you're going to commence, and we will be doing inspections to ensure that the work is done based on the plan and approval that was given.
Good. Thank you for that, Laura Lee. Cody, was there any other questions that came in through the chat?
At this point, I am not seeing any questions.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you for that. One of the other questions, or one of the other clarifications that I would like to make is that, as Steve had mentioned, this plan is not just for our urban centers. This is for all of West Grey. So, Steve, could you give us some examples of other municipalities that have sort of widened the scope of the eligibility area and what that looked like?
Yes, thank you. So it's been relatively recent where the province allowed municipalities to include their whole municipality. And I think Meaford was certainly one of the first, it was a first in our area, and maybe even one of the first in the province to do that. And they had a number of businesses. There was some signage, some basic signage at the roadside that was covered. And there was also, at that particular point, there was a focus on green energy. So there was a couple of green energy projects. I'm not sure that's still part of their program, but certainly access, and signage for some of their properties or businesses that were doing farm gate businesses that weren't necessarily primary agriculture. So whether they were making cheese or butter tarts or whatever, that was the kind of program they were offering in some of those cases.
Great, thank you. Laura Lee, is there anything further that you'd like to add that we haven't touched on? I mean, I think the key takeaways from tonight is, this is a substantial grant program that's available to both tenants and property owners. The idea is that it's a matching fund. We are anxious to work with property owners or tenants in advance of any work being done so that we can help them leverage the grant to its fullest capacity. But perhaps we could talk about the next steps for council once we gather any additional feedback through our website.
Absolutely. There'll be a report that provides a summation of the comments that we receive. One of the big components of this is that we're now reviewing our official plan, and we're also looking at, reviewing our zoning bylaw at the same time, which we're doing, and there's a lot of conversation about secondary suite developments, and those components may go a long way to providing more affordable housing, as Steve touched on earlier. And again, with accessibility being imperative to anyone that requires that, I think that's another component that will really shine through this plan at this point in time, especially in the initial stages. And again, the facade building and signage improvement is also great. And I think the municipality of Meaford has done a fantastic job of including the entire municipality, and they've demonstrated that that is something that really works and people are interested. So all of the home-based kind of components where there's signage and all that stuff that may be required, it's an excellent idea, and I think it will be very successful.
Great. Thank you very much. And I'd like to echo Steve's comment earlier tonight that, this plan, once adopted, really does show that West Grey is open for business, and we're looking forward to partnership opportunities with our entrepreneurs. With that, I'd like to go back to our dashboard to see if any members of council or members of the Economic Development Committee have any comments or questions. Cody, they could just raise their hand, or I'm sorry, if they're participating by phone, is it *9 that they need to use?
Yes, that is correct. If they've joined us by phone, *9 to raise your hand.
Great, thank you. Oh, and Councillor Shea has his hand up.
Hi, CAO Johnston, thank you. So I heard that the programs that are fundable are for additions or improvements, but not for removals. I was wondering if there would be
Hi, Councillor Shea. I believe we lost your audio. The last thing I heard was removal.
Yes, okay, so thank you. I'll move around and see if this helps. I heard that we were able to fund the addition of features enhancing our municipality, but not for the removal of things. I wondered if there was any way of addressing abandoned or legacy signage within our communities, signs for businesses which no longer exist, for example. Would that be something that could be supported?
Steve, I'll let you chime in on this at any point. So, sorry, Laura, did I talk over you? I'm sorry.
Not at all. Carry on, please. Thank you.
So,
thank you. I guess the context is where would the old signage be? Is it on an existing building? And
well,
so
typically they're on more or less abandoned commercial buildings that aren't being used currently.
Right, and they're hanging down, and they have the neon light bulb hanging out. Yeah.
Well, they're advertising businesses which don't exist.
Right. Yeah. I guess, you know, you have to work with the landlords to see what you could do on that. I mean, certainly they don't generally want to spend money, and it's understandable, on getting ready for a new tenant, but, you know, you sometimes wish they would put up signage to help advertise that the building's available and make it improve the look of the building. I don't have necessarily an answer for that. I mean, that's a property, I suppose it's a property standards, visual standards, I guess, but I know it's a problem, and I know you hope that someone takes it over and gets a new tenant and they use the program. In terms of taking buildings down, developing a building, that's another. I have never heard of actually the TIF program, which is, you don't have it in this program, but I suppose it could be used for that. Certainly you want to get buildings that are gray buildings or buildings that are no longer functional in what they wear, and sometimes they can be converted. But if the building's gone and just needs to be taken down, that's a bigger issue. Now, if you're taking it down and rebuilding a new building, then I think you could probably look at the tax increment financing program as an overall development of a site. So if you wanted more information on that, how a TIF might work, I could forward that. We could provide that to you. But that would be the way you would use that, is you'd use it to tear the old building down, do an environmental study on it, and then build what you were proposing, or develop it further. So whether that would be commercial or residential. But I don't think any of the programs that are listed here, I'm not sure how you would use them to tear or demo a building.
I guess then, Steve, just to elaborate on that, I guess the only thing would be, if a property was in disarray and it went into tax arrears and the municipality ended up owning that property just because of that component, I guess the surplus land and building grant might be eligible for that to be declared surplus if someone wanted to purchase it and redevelop it. That's really the only way I see that working through this program. And correct me if I'm wrong, but if they needed to go through some sort of an environmental study, I could see how that might be eligible. But yeah, again,
Right.
It's not solely intended for the demolition of buildings. That's not the intent of the plan at all.
Yeah, and you know, I guess that it depends on the state of the building. If it's completely gone and not usable, that's another issue. If it's somebody, you know, that's sort of waiting and was hoping and was maybe 5 years too late and someone taking it over, I suppose if you had a number of those buildings, you could try and put an incentive in here to deal with that. But I don't, so the short answer is I don't see any of our programs here that would help address a derelict, like a building that needed to come down.
Mm-hmm.
One, if it could come down and something new is going to go up.
I agree. I think when it
Thank you.
gets to a safety issue, it becomes something that should be dealt with through the Building Code Act and an order and a notice put on the property.
Councillor Shea, anything further?
Yes, no, that's very helpful. I was also thinking about buildings that have changed purpose and that a previous tenant had left signs behind. I know there's a couple of businesses in our urban centers that are operating, but this building that they're in has a sign indicating the previous tenant or owner. And I'm just wondering if there's any way that this fund could be used to encourage the current owner to remove those signs to alleviate confusion.
Right, thank you for that. And
Absolutely.
yes, Laura Lee, please go ahead.
Sorry about that. I keep talking over you. I apologize.
Not at all. You're on it.
Stream 1, the facade building and signage improvement grant is exactly what that is intended for. So the individual that's a tenant, provided they have permission from the property owner and they have the funds to match the amount of the cost for that sign to be removed and a new one installed, that's absolutely what this is intended to do.
Okay, terrific.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura Lee. Anything further, Councillor Shea?
No, that's great. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Could we go to Councillor Townsend, please?
Thank you. It's Councillor Townsend, and I'm also a member of the Economic Development Committee. We had a discussion at council, the last council from Savannah Myers, that talked about the potential of using this as part of the recovery plan from COVID. And I wonder if there's some elaboration that could happen for the public on what was shared, because while it's not specifically listed, there may be ways that you could look at some of the changes that are required for recovery under the same sort of eyeglass as the way the CIP has laid it out.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Townsend. Steve, are you able to give us some thoughts on that question?
Sure, and thank you for the question, because it is trying times, and it's different times for sure. I think what Savannah was talking about was that we basically threw out our work plan, not completely, but reorientated it based on what was happening in our business community and the broader community, and repurposed a lot of our economic development funds to help with recovery. Now, of course, upper levels of government have deeper pockets and they need to come to the table, and I think they did in terms of individuals and businesses, but we can also play our part. And so there was a number of programs that we initiated. One was through our, it was a program through our Enterprise Center in partnership with the province, where it's not a large grant, but it was a grant for businesses to access $2,500. I believe we had 82 applicants, 55 were awarded a grant, and I believe, and I don't know the names of the businesses, but I believe there were 3 from West Grey that applied. There is other mentoring services that we're offering as part of the recovery strategy. We also had our Rediscover Grey promotion, where we are highlighting 10 to 15 businesses and marketing that through social media, and the goal is to promote your green space, and then after you visit the green space, go visit a patio. And that's an ongoing campaign. I can't recall, I think West Grey is coming up in that week-long blitz where we do radio ads of your different businesses and promote the community. So there was a number of things we did, and that's part of what we were trying to assist businesses with. We can also, the other program we're talking about right now and elevating it is mentoring for businesses. One of the things we're hearing clearly is the $40,000 grant is great for certain businesses, but if the business model can't take on more debt, then giving more grants, or loans, even though they're interest-free, doesn't really help. And so there are some businesses, and many businesses, that really have to pivot and really rethink what their business strategy is going to be. And so we're offering mentoring advice through the Business Enterprise Center. We're just talking about elevating that to include some very specific, whether it's an accountant or our social media expert or legal. And I would offer, in partnership with your committee or through the chamber, if we wanted to host a specific day or schedule with businesses from West Grey, we could do that. there are more programs coming out all the time. RTO 7, as I mentioned earlier, just came out with 2 new programs to help businesses. They're specific to tourism, but your businesses are eligible, and we're told they still have access, that program for businesses. I think it's $1,000 if they're tourism related. What I don't know, and I apologize, I don't know whether a retail store qualifies for that. I was trying to get clarification, but didn't. So
Okay.
to bring it back, Savannah was talking about, this CIP is something that we've always pushed for and broadening across the region as an ongoing program. Certainly, when we see what we're seeing is a lot of new businesses looking at coming into the region, and this should help. But it's not, it wasn't necessarily designed in response to the pandemic.
Right. Right, and it has a different level of longevity as well. I mean, we've, with the, right now, we've got $140,000 available. So, that the intention from the Economic Development Committee, which Council supported, of course, was that, we need to have some real substance to the program. So that alone, speaks to your comment that we are open for business. Stephen, do you have anything further?
Nope, I'm fine, thank you.
I would only, say that we can tailor this to needs that we may see going forward right now. For example, broadband speed is becoming, or has been shown to be a real issue in our rural areas and even in our urban areas. And so, one of the things you may decide as a committee and as a municipality and say, we need to have a few hotspots where people can go and have really high speed. And it may not necessarily be through your whole downtown, but it could be through some of your public buildings. And you could allocate some of your CIP or develop a program that helps to do that. But again, I think you want to get your program launched and see the inquiries and the questions that are coming. And there are going to be times when you're going to say, no, that's not eligible, and take that information back and say, well, maybe we should make that eligible. So it's a really, you really do have, I think, a degree of flexibility in how you apply the program.
Very good, thank you. Councillor Townsend, anything further?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Great, thank you. Let's go to Councillor Hutchinson, who's also on our Economic Development Advisory Committee.
Yeah, it's Doug Hutchinson here, Councillor. I too am on the Economic Development Committee for West Grey, and we've done a lot of work on this the CIP program, and I thank Laura Lee for sort of laying it out there and explaining it in a very succinct manner. I just had a couple of thoughts and questions to go along with that. When I look at the number of people that are online joining us, and maybe I'm not seeing them all, but it's somewhat disappointing that we don't have a bigger turnout for this evening, though I realize we're doing it Zoom and it's technology and so on. But I think that really proves the point, because we've advertised and we've said it's coming and we want to get it out there. I think it proves the point that we really need to promote and advertise this program in a wide and ongoing manner. Just because, like I say, there doesn't seem to be a lot of interest yet, though we haven't officially, I guess, launched it. But I was thinking that we would have got a lot more people online tonight. I see we have the chamber, and I think we have maybe some BIA members there from Durham. So that was one of my thoughts. And I think the other thing that goes along with this, and the same one with the old Facade program that we had in West Grey, is you really need to get a commitment from the business people. Like, we can push all we want, but if the commitment isn't there from the people to actually make the change. So somehow we have to get people excited about it and start somewhere. And I think from that, it'll grow. So those are sort of my thoughts on where we're at right now.
Yes, and thank you for that, Councillor. I'd like to start with Steve, and then maybe we could go to Laura Lee. Steve, could you talk about how this program, once there's a little bit of pickup, I've seen in other communities, it kind of builds its own momentum. Like, we can do all the advertising about the program, but until people see real change in a facade or something, that sort of sparks the excitement. Is that a fair statement?
Certainly, certainly it is. Although I echo your sentiment. I mean, I think, on sound after 15 years of facade improvements and 20, 30 buildings, and still have people say I didn't know about the program, and it's a very interesting point, because you have to always keep pushing it. You want to have your facade grant people. You want to have pictures and cutting the ribbon. You want to be always, little information sheet in the tax, your municipal tax envelopes. You want to go door to door sometimes and always keep talking about it, because as much as you may see some new facades go up and the community looking great, it's just it always amazes me how many people still don't realize that the municipality was involved in. So I think it's just one of those, telling the story, and you just always have to keep hammering it.
Yes, thank you for that. Laura Lee, anything else to add?
Well, I do think that's true. And part of the ability which we can do to promote it is, I think, with the review, 12 months, and, have that on the website, make sure that we send out notices with the tax bills. I mean, we're already paying for postage anyway. I think that that's a really key factor in having people understand that these aren't individual landowners doing this all on their own. And lots of people misconstrue that. And I know, Steve, I guarantee that it did take a long time for people to understand that Owen Sound had this program. But I also think, by the same token, they did a great job of continuing to promote it, as you very aptly said. And I think that really is something that has to happen. And I do think council needs to be apprised once a year of how successful this is and what can and cannot happen. And did we use all of the funds from last year? Are we rolling them over? Does it make sense? All of those things, I think the current council of the day needs to understand how this is working.
Yes, very good. Thank you for that. I just received a message from Cody that he's got another question through the chat. Cody, could you go ahead, please?
Yes, thank you, Laura. I have received another question from the chamber. With the situation today, in reference to COVID-19, is there a possibility for lower owner or tenant percentages?
Thank you, Cody. From that component, there really isn't a solid answer to that question. I understand where it's coming from in terms of being concerned about vacant storefronts. Many municipalities have done a program where the storefront may be vacant, and they tend to decorate it. Certain different chambers of commerce have gone around and advertised businesses that are in place at the time, and really kind of tried to promote that from the perspective that we're still here, we're still actually looking like we care. But to answer the question of how people are impacted right now, I will say one thing about this. If people are looking to improve their buildings through the CIP, they still are eligible for other funding. However that might work for them in terms of stream, whether it's from the federal government or not. So they could have, a set amount of funds that they're willing to put forward. The funds will be matched by the municipality if they're approved, but they're still also eligible for the other funding. They just have to claim how much of that funding they're getting. I hope that answers the question, but yeah, we don't have a prediction at this point in terms of percentage of vacant storefronts that may or may not pop up.
Right. Good. Thank you for that. And I have to apologize, Councillor Hutchinson. I should have asked you if you had a follow-up question for either Steve or Laura Lee.
No, I think I'm fine. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. And I see Councillor Hergert now has her hand up. Could we go to her, please?
Yes, and if I may, Laura, before we move on to Councillor Hergert, the chamber had just sent a follow-up.
Oh, okay.
The chamber's question was not in response to businesses that are vacant, but businesses that are running but may not necessarily have the funds to do a 50-50 split.
I can respond to that. At this point in time, the program is geared to be 50-50. It's not a grant that's intended to fund your project. And again, we may review that in future, but if they can find another source of funding for their 50%, then, you know, as long as they can demonstrate that they bring those funds forward. I understand the Chamber's position that it may be a little difficult for people to do that right now. But as Steve very appropriately shared, there are programs out there that may be able to give them, you know, zero interest loans or low interest loans to assist them moving forward with what they may have planned. Each business is different, so it would have to be something that they had to consider from their own business plan perspective.
Very good. Thank you for that, Laura Lee. Steve, is there anything you'd like to add to that conversation?
Yeah, it's challenging times when your vacancy rate starts to get above 13%. And you're right, there are many things that other communities are doing. And I don't know, you know, you may have an opportunity to promote the CIP to people coming and just passing through. You know, you've got one of the interesting things through, you know, you've got a main highway there. You don't wonder if you can talk about both online and with signage that you have facade improvement programs and however you spruce up even a vacant building short term, it helps, but that is a challenge.
Indeed, yes. Thank you. Thank you for that. Cody, let's go to Councillor Herger.
Yes, thank you very much. Question for Steve, I believe. The tax increment financing, could you explain that a bit more, please?
Sure. I call it a TIF, but it means tax increment financing. And what it's meant for is generally larger projects on parcels of land that have been stubbornly vacant, I'll say. It's not meant for development that's progressing normally, both residential or commercial. So you might have a property that's sitting in wherever it's sitting on a corner that's high profile or wherever it is, and you're wanting to get it developed, and there's a gap between, say, the condition of the property and the cost of building new. And the way it works, it used to be only applied to brownfield cleanup, but then the province approved it to be used for any development. So the way it works is the landowner is building an office building or residential building or commercial building. They get 90%, in year one, they would get 90% of the municipal taxes back in a grant. And then the next year they would get 80% down. So over a 10-year period, it would slowly decline. And that incentive is there to be used for whatever costs that the building site might have, whether it's servicing or brownfield cleanup or just the economics. So I think the best example that we had in Owen Sound, and I have to tell you, I explained this incentive many, many times, and it's not an easy incentive for developers to understand. It sounds like a big gift, and it is, but what it really does is it helps push those projects that are challenged with whatever that challenge is, as I said. So the example in Sound is the family health team that was built on the harbor, had significant brownfield issues, and they used it. I believe it's an 80,000 square foot building. So the building will be there for 30 or 40 years or longer. And the municipality had to give up some grants in the beginning. So the first couple of years, you're obviously giving up a fair amount of assessment tax, but you get it back. And so the TIF is not something that you use very often, or in my opinion, or my experience, but it is useful to have when that opportunities come along.
So Steve, if I could just continue that conversation, is there a reason why we would not want to include it? Or as a council, from a council angle, is there a limitation to the properties that we could allow for this TIF? If we knew there were persistent properties that just are developable or need to be demolished or whatever those items are, could you see this being a tool that actually would benefit for those bigger projects?
I mean, it can be, but I have to tell you, there's many properties I've talked to developers, and they for whatever reason they can't get their head around it, or they don't understand it, or it's not enough. But it's something that I find in certain situations it can be very beneficial. Now, one of the issues that came up with it, although there was a workaround in Guelph, was that the developer, the grant would go back to the landowner. So if you're in a condo situation, the grant would go back to the condo owner, and the developer actually wouldn't get the benefit. And so that was a bit of a problem a few years ago. But I think we've got that worked out. It is something that could probably be put in place if you had a big development come along. You probably have time, just because big developments take a long time to process. But I don't know that it was, I think your first CIP, you're going to see your most action and most of your priority around the facade, accessibility, and your secondary suites.
Okay, so we'll hold on to this as a possible down the road then, huh?
Yeah, I don't want to say that it was, I think it's a good tool and you could always add it, but it is something that's harder to communicate, and it does take, you do have to administer it over a period of years. You don't have to budget for it in the sense that, it's not coming out of a budget allocation, but you are giving up future assessment. And you do have to be careful, because it's not something you give out to everybody, because that's self-defeating.
Sure. Another question, internet hotspots. How could you see the municipality working with that? We definitely know internet is a challenge here in and around West Grey, and we've got just a tremendous amount of trees that make it nearly impossible in some places. But other towns or municipalities like Kitchener, Waterloo, they've gone gangbusters with hotspots and made it a real thing for their town.
Yeah, so I think many businesses offer, access, coffee shops, and so it's much more prevalent in communities now. Ideally, sure, we'd all like to be a Stratford. We'd like to have a whole, Wi-Fi, free Wi-Fi through everywhere, but that doesn't, it's not necessarily practical. I do think, though, if you have a number of places that are publicly accessible and you have really high speed, it can be useful for certain businesses and individuals. And so whether that's outside a public building or inside the public building, I was always amazed at how many people would sit outside our visitor center and, but anyway, I think it is useful. I do know certain businesses within the region, when they're dealing with very, very large files, they just can't, if they're in a rural setting, it just doesn't work. So if they can come into a spot in the town or the library or even in a parking lot and upload or download, mostly uploading their large files, it helps. It's not going to solve it, but it helps them get through a particular period of time, right?
Could I ask one other question? Last question would be for any part of the CIP. Could it be an organization such as the downtown businesses that we would grant money to, or is it individual property owners only, or property owners / tenants?
Lori, maybe you want to. Yeah. I would think it would be just building owners, because you have to have an agreement with
That's correct, because the way we've written the document, Councillor Hurd, is that it's administrated by staff on behalf of council. It hasn't been allocated to a third party, so to speak. And that's something I guess we could consider down the road, where they get the allocation of funds. But again, the evaluation of that application that might come in is going to see a different approach than we have with our OP policies, our zoning, all of those things that, public works and building need to look at as well. So I'm not sure how that might look, but that's something that once this plan is put into place, that could be a very valid question to speak about in 12 months. But typically the community improvement plan is only administered at the municipal level and not to a different entity.
And I guess the follow-up to that would be is if the owner didn't perform on the granting, then that would be accessible on their taxes?
Well, and that therein lies the problem, right? So without municipal staff kind of monitoring the program from a building perspective, public works perspective, this is not a program where an individual would come and say, I'm going to do X, Y, Z, and they just don't end up completing the project. There has to be administration in place to ensure that that is a tax penalty on their tax bill. Now, I know that I did see Carrie on here earlier, Director Mighton. I'm not sure if she wants to elaborate on that component, but I would say that, essentially at the end of the day, there has to be some responsibility by the municipality that we're administering this and doing our own inspections, ensuring that the documents are in place, ensuring that planning and building and all of those things are dealt with, especially from a safety and public works perspective as well. I just think that it makes more sense for the municipality to do it for the foreseeable. And then, if we graduate into a different program, that's a different story.
Sure. The one program I was thinking of was a third party that would come and make like accessible ramps. But I guess what I was thinking in my mind is, would we ever grant to them? But your answer is no, we need to be accountable for public money. I understand that. Right. So yeah, just thinking a little out there. Okay, thank you very much.
Yep, no problem, anytime.
Very good. Thank you, Councillor Hurd. Laura, you had your hand up for a little bit there. Was there anything else that you wanted to add into what Steve was sharing?
I did, and thank you for that. So in speaking about the TIF program, it really, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not dissimilar to the CIP program. There still has to be an approval process, and it still has to be vetted through either a staff administrator or something that would go to council, if the case may be. But all of those things would be evaluated on the basis of the validity of their application. So I just wanted to make sure that was out there, that the TIF program, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, could it not be administered separately from the CIP?
Well, no, it definitely has to be part of the CIP, and it is administered, and you don't enter into it until, same thing. You enter into an agreement before you start the work. So it becomes part of the economics of the project. It's a significant part of the economics of the project, but it falls under the CIP and would have to be approved, because that otherwise would be bonusing.
You're entirely right, and thank you for the clarification. So essentially, at the end of the day, I think that's something we should keep on the radar to consider after we see the success of the CIP itself, instead of including it now. And there are going to be people that don't understand those two veins of the CIP in general, and then again the TIF as part of the CIP. So thank you for your clarification, because I do think there is a little confusion from people that they're both separate entities. It's an inclusionary component.
Yes, thank you very much for that important clarification. I'm going to go to Deputy Mayor. He has his hand up. Could we unmute his mic, please? Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you very much, CEO Johnson, and thank you everyone for your presentation and your time today. I guess I also sit on the economic development, and I can tell you we've done a tremendous amount of work on the CIP, and I'm really glad to see that we're actually almost to some closure on it. Just for the funding, is it like a drawdown that is how the grant would be rolled out, similar to if you're building or doing a renovation on your house, you get 35, and then the 30. Is that kind of how this would work? Is one question. And I also think this is going to actually self-promote itself. If we do find, or somebody comes forward, they do a facade or signs or whatever it is going to be, we need to utilize them as a success story. And I think it'll self-launch, because we're not in a great big city. We're in a smaller urban settings, and I think people talk, and I think it'll be an easy promotion once we do find somebody that's going to participate that will benefit from it. And I think it'll take off, but we just got to do our work and get there. So if I can get back to how the grant would work, because I guess somebody did ask that, if it's like a draw, or is it all at the end, so they've got to finance up to the end until they get their money? Thank you.
Yes, and I appreciate that,
question,
Deputy
Marlene.
Mayor. You and I can't stop talking at the same time.
Oh, it's just, well, we're a team.
So essentially, the demonstration of the funds from their 50% component have to be there, and the plans have to be approved. So it's not the same as a house build in terms of drawdown.
Okay, so again, if they've got their 50% in, but they're hiring somebody to come in regardless of whatever work they're doing, and they're 50%, because trades are going to be wanting to be paid. If you're talking over the course of a 6-month period, nobody's going to carry. I guess that's is the grant handed at completion, or is there a draw throughout as the work is progressing?
Yeah, that's a very good point that I do think actually needs further clarification in terms of whether or not you get 10% here, 10% there as you hit milestones. And that's a very valid point. So I appreciate that, because that's something that we should really be considering.
Okay, I have no further questions, CO Johnson. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And Steve, is that something that you could share what perhaps other municipalities are doing in that particular circumstance?
Yes, I think in some cases it's just a grant. You have an agreement, and then after you're done the project, you present your receipts, and then you get a check as written. So.
Yeah. Good.
And I do think that, I do appreciate that comment, because especially during these times within the first 12 months, I think there needs to be, we're looking at them to put a 50% contribution forward, but then again, we're asking them if we're going to operate in that manner, they're paying for 100% of it, demonstrating that they did the work, which is contradictory to a few things in the plan itself, in the fact that they can't commence the work without approval. So yeah, I'm sure we're going to need to think about that a little bit.
Yes, absolutely, has given us pause to think, and truly through the comment opportunities on our website. Laura Lee, can you remind us all that we're hoping that we can wind down the public comments by the end of August? Is that correct? Did we lose Laura Lee?
Sorry, I muted myself. So
the
form on the website is a fillable form or printable. So you can, use your own preference for that. We do have the secure drop box at the municipal office at the front door. And again, if mail permits, you can also submit your comments by mail as well.
Yes, so there's a great opportunity for people to share their thoughts, and we'll do a little bit more promotion for those that couldn't tune in tonight. And of course, this is recorded, so they can listen in when it's convenient. But the feedback from the community is really going to help us solidify what our plan looks like, because each community is unique. Laura Lee, could you speak to next steps?
So absolutely, what we're going to do is we're going to take the comments that we receive from the public, and that will come in the form of a report to Committee of the Whole and or Council, however that might work out in terms of timing, looking at like the second week of October. And Council will have a discussion basically around those comments and how we might adjust the document to that effect. It's hoping that 2 weeks later, we would in turn absolutely have something for Council to consider based on those comments and go from there. So we're hoping that by the end of,
That's great.
by the end of, you know, toward the beginning of November, let's say, that we're looking to have this in place and approved.
Great. Thank you very much. With that, I'd like to do one more call. If there's any questions from any members of the committee, our guests who are joining us, business community, members of council, we'll look for a show of hands if anyone has a closing thought or question of clarification. And Cody, there's no other chat messages?
No, reviewing the dashboard and the chat that I have on my end, I am not seeing any public comment or questions.
Alrighty, thank you. So if I could just open up the mic one last time, first to Steve and then to Laura Lee to conclude the evening, that would be great. Steve, final thoughts?
Thank you. I think it's exciting. I think it's great that you're working with your business community and your committee to identify this. We've seen this work very well in other communities, and you'd think every community be jumping all over it. And you know what? It takes time to put this in place, and it takes time and consultation, and municipalities have a lot on their plate. So I congratulate you on that, and look forward to working with you on if there's something specific that we need to add, something that's unique. Let's look at it, because you have that flexibility in this program. So thank you.
And Steve, thank you. We can't thank the county enough in general for your support and assistance with this program. I'm thinking that before I let Laura Lee have the final say, I'd love to go to Mayor Robinson just to have her closing comment, and then Laura Lee, you can wrap up the evening for us. Mayor Robinson?
Well, thank you, CAO Johnson, very much appreciate that. This is an exciting time, a great opportunity through the Community Improvement Plan. I'd like to thank everyone that participated in this information session, and I really appreciate the public comments. We as council appreciate the public comments and also the participation through listening. I think that is equally as important. We look forward to the staff report coming before council for consideration of approval. And I think this is a fantastic opportunity for West Grey. Thank you very much, and everyone have a good evening.
Well, thank you very much, Mayor. And Laura Lee, you have the final closing remarks tonight.
Well, that's perfect. And I sentiment with the mayor's comments that yes, it's a great opportunity for people to be out there. Anyone participating right now, the best outlet for which to kind of demonstrate that this program is there is by word of mouth as well. And, you know, Stephen, I really appreciate your comments with respect to signage. That's a really great idea. And I think, you know, there's something that council can consider here as part of that, to have signage demonstrating like, look, we're in a position. Where that signage might be located at this moment in time, I don't know, but we can figure that out. But I do think that this is a great program, and the more we can get it out there for people to demonstrate that, you know, commercial properties are important, they're fundamental to the economics of the municipality, and we need to promote that as much as we can.
Great, indeed. Thank you very much. And thank you for everyone for your time this evening. Please take some time to review the slide deck. It's a very good summary of the highlights of the plan. The draft plan is on our website as well, if you'd like to take the time to review it and send your comments in. Oh, and Laura Lee, one final comment from you, please.
Yes, thank you for reminding me. But yes, so the comment form is posted on our website, and you can access that there. I will have this copy of the presentation put up for the short Coles Notes version of what we discussed this evening. And It is a recorded meeting, so if that is something that someone would like to have a copy of, that's also possible as well.
Very good. Thank you very much. And with that, I will once again, on behalf of the panel, council, members of our committee, thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to your feedback and input on this important program. Have a lovely evening. Thanks again.